So now I have a question. And my question is, in another talk you gave, I heard you talk about the different schools of thought in China. You touched on it slightly when you talked about the Communist Party, but that, while there may be differences among branches of the Communist parties and thinkers, you actually talked about different schools of thought in China. And I think that it's hard for us, given the information war, to conceptualize China as other than monolithic in its thinking. And I wonder if you could talk for a little bit on that.
Well, it's just a basic thing, right? There are 1.4 billion people in China. There are 100 million people in the Communist Party. You've all been in organizations. You're probably in a peace group in your locality. 5 people in a room, there's probably at least 6 opinions, why don't we afford the Chinese the dignity of having opinions that are different from other Chinese? There's a kind of strange undertow of racism here, that all Chinese look alike, all Chinese think the same. I mean, honestly, how else to understand the so facile way in which the United States government gets away with saying, China, the Chinese, and they will deliberately call it the CCP, not the CPC, all this kind of stuff, 100 million people in that party. Forget the rest of the country for a minute, Mary. Just in the party, there are contending schools of thought. Xi Jinping, for instance, is the embodiment of the left flank of the Communist Party of China. Earlier party secretaries were of different kind of politics. I mean, there's Jiang Zemin was much closer to the right in political terms. Hu Jintao straddled the middle, and so on and so forth. And even today in the party, there are many schools of contending thought. There are different kinds of Marxisms. There are people who are kind of nostalgic Maoists. There are neoliberals. I've met senior officials who work in the central bank who basically could be IMF officials. They are party members, but they believe in neoliberal political theory. They believe they think Hayek is a foresighted thinker, Milton Friedman, and so on. So there's a range of opinion. It just so happens that since Xi Jinping came to power over the party, and then therefore his faction is dominant in statecraft, the left is now, or at least the established party left, is in power in China. And that's the reason why early on he moved the agenda to have Marxism taught again in schools and in universities. So institutes of Marxism was set up all around the country. Now, it's not easy to sustain these things because for decades, Marxism has not been encouraged. And so they had a hard time finding teachers. That tells you a little bit about the zigzags of social development. And also, Xi Jinping put a lot at stake in eradicating absolute poverty. That's part of the left's heritage. He also learned a lot from the experience of Bo Xilai and the Chongqing model, where there was this whole thing about mobilize the people with red songs and with festivals and bring back some of the commemorations of like the important events of left history in China and so on, the humiliation of the Opium Wars. And Bo Xilai made the whole district sort of galvanized to sing, the Internationale and things like that. And even though Bo Xilai himself was completely discredited, corruption, and there was murder involved and so on, that Chongqing model very much influenced the left faction led by Xi Jinping. So I just want to make it very clear to you, there's that question people ask: is China restored capitalism? Is it this? Is that? Those are two non-dialectical. One needs to understand the process in the same way we afford a process thinking to the United States government, where we see there are shifts, there are balances, there are motions, that yes, Biden is different from Trump in this respect, but not in that respect, and so on. I think we need to understand both China as a society with a lot of different stresses, strains, inequalities, debates, and so on. And then the Chinese Communist Party also with a lot of internal debate and disruption. I mean, guys, 100 million members of the Chinese party. As I said earlier, that's 1 in 3 people in the United States would have been in that party. That's an extremely large political party. even if the country is 1.4 billion, even for a 1.4 billion people country, 100 million people in one political organization, that's confounding.
So, Richard Oakes would like you to talk about Taiwan and China. The way he has phrased it is, does Taiwan belong to China? And then somebody else piped in with, does China belong to Taiwan? But can you talk about China and Taiwan? And
Well,
how
yes,
we might view that.
Pardon?
How we might view that.
Right. So this is an interesting issue. Sorry, I was distracted for a minute putting something off. This is an interesting issue. In you know that in 1949, when the Communist Party prevailed in the Civil War, the Kuomintang goes to Taiwan and into exile into very many places around the world, but also into Taiwan, and they set up the Republic of China. Now, the Kuomintang, in its constitution, does not want to have Taiwan as an independent state. This is a misapprehension that people have, that Taiwan is a state and it wants to remain a state. No. The Kuomintang's constitution actually understands that it is the Republic of China, which includes all of territorial China, including Mongolia, Tibet, Xinjiang, the whole lot. So the Kuomintang party, which is not in power now in Taiwan, actually sees the whole of China as its dominion. The government in Beijing also sees all of China and its dominion, including Taiwan. So they both believe in the one China principle. It's just that, well, there are two different contending parties with two scales of influence that believe that it should be one China. It's not like the Kuomintang is for an independent Taiwan. The current party, the Democratic Party that rules in Taiwan, has a very mysterious position. I don't know what their position is. Do they want an independent Taiwan? Do they want to incorporate the whole of China? Not clear to me. Ever since President Tsai came to power in 2016 in Taiwan, she has ramped up the attacks on China. They come from they're called the Democratic Party, but they are to the right of the Kuomintang. And they are much closer to Washington, D.C. Well, it's 2016, remember. Guess who's in the White House? And so between Taiwan and the Trump administration, there was a very close usage of each other to put pressure on China. This is also very unhealthy because, look, Taiwan's leading trading partner is not the United States, it's China. That is to say, it's the People's Republic of China. Most of Taiwan's capital is tied up inside Xinjiang in one way or the other, including Foxconn. You know, the large company that makes Apple devices is a Taiwanese company. So Taiwan's, attempt to poke the finger in the eye in the People's Republic of China is not going to help Taiwan. And let me ask you a question. In the early 1990s, 1992, a consensus document was created between the ruling parties in Taiwan, the Kuomintang, and with the People's Republic of China. It's actually an interesting document. It's called the 1992 consensus document. Around this time, a party was floated in Taiwan that called itself, if I'm wrong, I think in 1992, there were 51 states in the United States, I think, something like that. Anyway, whatever number there was, United States plus one, it called itself the 52nd State Party. They wanted to join the US as a state, make Taiwan a state of the United States. This is the only way to protect Taiwan. So interesting, At the time, people are laughing and saying, look, Puerto Rico is not going to get full statehood. Not because necessarily the Puerto Rican sovereignty movement, although that's there, but also because the Republican right wing may not want to have Puerto Ricans come in larger numbers, more Democratic senators and so on. You know what I'm talking about? That the racism of the Republican Party would not want Taiwan joining the United States. What if Taiwan is, and by the way, both the Democratic Party and the KMT are to the left of the Republican Party. Likely their senators would vote for the Democrats. So there's no hope of Taiwan being a state of the US. But there is a constituency in Taiwan that would like that. That's a very odd constituency, and the Democratic Party has those kind of people in it. So I would say, what's the relationship between Taiwan and China? It's a contest. They're contending over two visions. It's not that Beijing wants to usurp Taiwan. Taiwan wants to usurp the People's Republic of China. There are two contending forces that want the same thing. They want a unified China, but they each want to be the one, governing a unified China. If today there's a vote inside China for whether you'd go with the Communist Party or the KMT, I will guarantee you the Communist Party will win. It's not like the KMT wants an open, free election where they can participate. They will not win at all.